Let's get weird into it. Number 8. The original No Rules Fight Club. Imagine you're in a fist fight. Now imagine the only rules are no biting and no eye gouging. And even those are more like polite suggestions that the referee might enforce if he's not too busy enjoying the spectacle. Welcome to pancration, the ancient Greek equivalent of putting a wolverine and a honey badger in a phone booth and betting on the outcome. This wasn't your neatly organized 5-round UFC match. This was a brutal, grinding, human demolition derby that ended only when one person either passed out, died, or tapped out by raising a single finger, a gesture that basically meant, "I formally concede that you have turned my skeleton into a wind chime." Fighters were revered as heroes, men who had stared into the abyss and made the abyss flinch. They would dislocate each other's joints, snap limbs, and apply chokeholds that would make a boa constrictor blush. So why was this horrifying human pretzel contest an Olympic sport? Because it was the perfect final exam for a Greek soldier. Think about it. You're a hoplite in a phalanx. The battle is a chaotic mess. Your spear shatters. Your shield is ripped from your arm. An enemy is on top of you. What now? You don't have time to ask for a new spear. You have to fight with what nature gave you. Your hands, your feet, and your incandescent rage. Pancration was the ultimate training for that moment. It taught you how to survive when all your weapons were gone. It taught you how to use your opponent's weight against them, how to find a weak spot, and how to endure an amount of pain that would make most people simply curl up and accept their fate. It was a factory for producing men who were just as dangerous unarmed as they were with a sword in hand. Basically, it was the state-sponsored creation of super soldiers, except instead of a serum, they just used broken bones and public humiliation as the primary ingredients. Number 7. NASCAR with knives. You think motorsports are dangerous today? A fiery crash at Talladega is a fender bender compared to a Tuesday afternoon at the Circus Maximus in Rome. Chariot racing was less of a sport and more of a high-speed knife fight on wooden death traps pulled by 4,000 pounds of panicked horseflesh. The drivers, or charioteers, were the rock stars of their day, but they had a life expectancy shorter than a housefly. They would wrap the reins around their torsos to get better leverage, which was a great idea until they crashed, at which point it turned them into a human anchor being dragged through a cheese grater of splintered wood and flailing hooves. That's why they all carried a sharp knife, the falx, specifically to cut themselves free before they were pulverized. The war connection here seems flimsy at first. It's just racing, right? Wrong. The chariot was one of the earliest and most devastating weapons of war. It was the ancient world's tank, a mobile platform for archers and spearmen to wreak havoc on infantry. To control one effectively in the chaos of battle, you needed superhuman skill. You had to manage 4 highly strung, powerful animals while navigating broken terrain, avoiding your own troops, and dodging enemy projectiles. Now look at the Circus Maximus. It's a perfect military simulation. You're maneuvering at insane speeds in a confined space, surrounded by hostile competitors who are actively trying to ram you into the central barrier, the spina, or get their wheels tangled with yours to flip you over. You have to have perfect spatial awareness, nerves of steel, and the ability to control your horses with microscopic precision. You're learning to manage chaos. You're training to be a warrior king from the Bronze Age, mastering the art of high-speed violence. It was the most popular sport in the Roman Empire, a weekly spectacle that secretly conditioned the population to see high-speed, high-casualty events as thrilling entertainment. Number 6. The Polite Duel. Let's go to ancient Egypt, where things were a bit more civilized, or so you'd think. Meet Tadib, a form of ritual stick fighting that looks like a dance until you realize the entire point is to land a clean, debilitating blow on your opponent's head. Using a 4-foot wooden staff, 2 combatants would face off, often accompanied by music, in a display of skill, footwork, and precision. It was graceful, it was formal, and it was also a direct training manual for warfare. The average Egyptian soldier or peasant levy wasn't kitted out in fancy bronze armor with a masterfully crafted khopesh. Most of them were handed a long stick, maybe with a pointy bit on the end if they were lucky, and told to go stand in a line. A spear is, for all intents and purposes, a staff with an attitude problem. So how do you train thousands of farmers to become a cohesive fighting force? You turn the fundamentals of spear and staff combat into a national sport. Tadib taught everything a soldier needed to know. It drilled footwork, balance, and timing into their muscle memory. They learned how to block, parry, and strike with lightning speed. They learned how to find an opening in an opponent's defense and exploit it without getting their own skull cracked. The headshot-only rule wasn't just for show. It trained fighters to aim for the most vulnerable part of an enemy not protected by a shield. It was a low-cost, highly effective way to create a population of men who were instinctively competent with the most common weapon on the battlefield. It's like teaching an entire country to play baseball, knowing that one day you're going to hand them all grenades and tell them the game is now real. Number 5. The board game of doom. Okay, stick with me on this one. You're probably thinking, a board game? How is pushing pretty rocks around a wooden plank supposed to prepare you for getting a spear in the face? But the royal game of one of the oldest board games we've ever discovered, was basically a 4,500-year-old military strategy simulator for Mesopotamian generals. This wasn't Candyland. This was a cutthroat race game governed by dice rolls and tactical decisions. Players would race their 7 pieces across a shared board, trying to get them all to the finish line before their opponent. The trick was, you could land on your opponent's piece, sending it all the way back to the start. It was a game of probability, risk management, and pure, unadulterated spite. You had to know when to play it safe and consolidate your forces, and when to make a risky dash for the finish line. You had to decide which of your pieces to advance, sacrificing one to protect another, or moving a different one to block your enemy's path. Sound familiar? It should. This is logistics. It's resource management. It's the core of military strategy. A general doesn't just charge into battle. They have to manage supply lines, decide which battalions to deploy where, anticipate enemy movements, and know when to sacrifice a pawn to take a queen. The royal game of trained the mind to think several moves ahead, to weigh risks against rewards, and to understand that a single bad decision, a single roll of the dice you weren't prepared for, could undo all your progress. It taught the fundamental lesson of warfare. The battle is often won or lost before the first sword is even drawn. It's just like modern generals playing complex war games on a computer, except their CPU was made of clay, and their graphics were carved into lapis lazuli. Number 4. The Viking Riot. If you wanted to invent a sport specifically to create Vikings, you would invent Knattleikur. This was an Icelandic game so violent it made pancration look like a pillow fight. The rules are a bit murky because, let's be honest, the Vikings weren't big on writing things down, but from what we can piece together from the sagas, it was a bat and ball game that usually devolved into a full-scale brawl. 2 teams would try to get a hard ball across a field, using bats to hit it, and their bodies to hit, well, everything else. The game would often last all day, and players would get tackled, beaten with the bats, and generally pummeled into the frozen turf. Broken bones weren't a bug, they were a feature. Sagas described players leaving the field bloody, bruised, and sometimes not leaving at all. It was a social event where settling old scores with a bat was considered good sportsmanship. This wasn't just for fun, this was a human tempering process. Viking life was harsh, and Viking warfare was harsher. Knattleikur built an insane level of pain tolerance. It taught you to keep fighting even after you've taken a blow that would send a normal person to the emergency room. More importantly, it trained Vikings in small unit tactics. You had to work together, pushing and shielding your teammates, forming a human wall to advance the ball. Sound anything like a shield wall, the cornerstone of Viking combat? It bred a kind of ferocious, reckless courage and a deep-seated aggression that was essential for a warrior culture based on raiding. It was less a game and more a team-building exercise for a corporate culture where the main business was piracy and plunder. Number 3. The game of life and death. The Mesoamerican ball game is one of the most misunderstood sports in history. You've probably seen the pictures. Players with padded hips hitting a solid rubber ball, trying to get it through a ridiculously high stone hoop without using their hands or feet. It was an incredibly difficult game demanding acrobatic skill and teamwork. But what really grabs people's attention is the ending. Because sometimes the game ended with a human sacrifice. For a long time, people assumed the losers were the ones who got the axe. A fitting punishment for failure, right? But more and more evidence suggests it may have been the winners, or at least the winning captain, who were given the honor of being sacrificed to the gods. Imagine winning the Super Bowl, and instead of a trip to Disneyland, your MVP gets a ceremonial obsidian knife to the chest. It completely reframes the entire concept of competition. This entire spectacle was a massive psychological prep for war. On one level, it was physical training. The agility, speed, and endurance required were immense. But on a deeper level, it was spiritual and mental conditioning. It ingrained the belief that death in a glorious context, whether on the ball court or the battlefield, was the highest honor a warrior could achieve. It prepared society for the brutal realities of Aztec or Mayan warfare, where capturing enemies for ritual sacrifice was often the primary goal. The game was a public demonstration that life was fleeting, and that giving yours to the gods and the state was a noble, even desirable outcome. It's the ultimate form of psychological warfare, waged on your own people to make them fearless. Number 2. Polo with a corpse. In the vast, rugged plains of Central Asia, they have a sport called buzkashi. The name literally translates to goat pulling. It's played on horseback, like polo, but instead of a ball, they use the headless, disemboweled carcass of a goat, which is often soaked in water to make it heavier. The goal is for a rider to grab the 100-pound carcass, fight his way through a scrum of dozens of other riders, and drop it in a designated circle. There are almost no rules. What follows is pure, unadulterated chaos. Riders whip each other, their horses bite and kick, and men are literally torn from their saddles trying to wrestle the goat away. It is a brutal, frantic, and unbelievably skilled display of horsemanship, and it is the single greatest training exercise for cavalry warfare ever invented. The horsemen of the steppe, the Scythians, the Mongols, the Huns, were the most feared warriors of their age. Their entire way of life and war was centered on the horse. Buzkashi hones every single skill a cavalryman needs. You learn to control your horse with only your legs while your hands are busy wrestling a dead animal. You develop incredible balance, strength, and aggression. You learn how to fight in a chaotic, swirling melee, protecting your horse while attacking your opponents. It's a simulation of a cavalry charge, a desperate fight for an objective, and a test of sheer endurance all rolled into one. Playing buzkashi meant you were part of a culture where mastering the art of mounted combat wasn't a specialty. It was just what you did for fun on a Friday. Number 1. The Flooded Colosseum. The Romans were the undisputed kings of turning violence into entertainment. Gladiatorial combat is the obvious example, but they had something even more insane, more spectacular, and more horrifyingly grand: the Naumachia. This was, and I am not exaggerating, a full-scale naval battle staged inside an arena for an audience. They would either flood the Colosseum itself or build a massive artificial basin, bring in thousands of prisoners of war or condemned criminals, put them on full-sized warships, and have them fight to the death. This wasn't a reenactment with actors. These were real ships, with real weapons, manned by thousands of real people who were given a simple choice: kill or be killed. The emperor would watch from his box as fleets of biremes and triremes rammed into each other. Marines boarded enemy vessels, and the water turned red. Sometimes they would even throw in crocodiles and hippos to make it more interesting. The Naumachia was the ultimate military propaganda. First, it was a staggering display of Roman engineering and wealth. The logistics of flooding the Colosseum are mind-boggling even today. It was a way of saying, we are so powerful, we can move the ocean itself for our amusement. Second, it was a celebration of Roman naval supremacy, reenacting famous victories and reminding everyone of the power of the Roman Navy. But most importantly, it was the final step in desensitizing the Roman population to mass slaughter. Watching thousands of people die as a form of entertainment makes it much easier to support endless foreign wars. It turns the grim reality of battle into a thrilling spectator sport, and makes the deaths of nameless foreigners seem not just acceptable, but fun. It was the Roman Empire's most terrifying and effective tool for training not soldiers, but a public willing to send them to war. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.